Hey guys, so we'll be going to start with introduction to DevNet and automation. Okay, so let's start with the session. So before we go forward and understand what is a DevNet automation and what is the automation in a network, so we need to understand what is a traditional network architecture and the SD-WAN, what it provide us the benefit while automating the networks. So before we go, so we need to understand what is a traditional network. See, traditional networks where devices having control layer and the forwarded layer means each device having three planes. So we need to go and configure each device separately, which each device will be receiving data on its interfaces and then forward this information to other devices. And to configure this on each devices, we need to have the control of those devices and configure those instructions on specific devices. So you will be having a distributed control for all the separate devices. So it will be time consuming and it will take more complexity to configure these devices. So if you have more than, let's say, 100 devices, so how you will be going to configure those, correct? So what option we are having? So after programmability comes into the picture, we are having a centralized nodes where we will be configuring multiple devices at large scale. So at large scale, if you want to configure the devices, where SDN comes into the picture, where you will be having controller, which will be playing a vital part while automating devices at large scales. So you will be running some applications, so you will be deploying those configurations with the help of few applications. Your controller will be having connection with multiple devices like your infrastructure. So you will be having some APIs. It's a application programmable interfaces. You will be passing your instruction in a specific instruction. You will be passing your instructions into a specific format. So your instruction will be understood by every devices as a global. Okay, so you will be passing this information to the controller and controller will be passing those information to the n number of devices. So we'll be going to understand what is a northbound APIs and southbound APIs in our course. Okay, so I hope this is the brief introduction what we are having for the network automation. So we understood what is a traditional network and the SDN network architecture, where the centralized control of the devices will help us to configure or automate or work with the large scale devices with ease. Okay, so let's go forward and understand what Cisco have us to offer for. So let's see. So here we'll go and discuss the Cisco stack. Okay. So we all know Cisco provide certifications in different levels. Cisco is having entry level certification, associate level certifications, and the professional level certifications. And lastly, we are having expert level certification. So Cisco provide certification in various fields. So we will be having DevNet and the automation field, which we will be following for. So we will be having DevNet as associate level, which is DevNet associate. Then we are having DevNet professional and DevNet expert. Okay. So we will be going to cover DevNet automation at NH from associate to expert level. So where we will be going in depth of network automation and we'll be going to understand every details of automation from scratch. We will understand the life cycle of application, how programming is being used for the development of the application, how this development life cycle will help us to understand the network flow and how we can interact with the networking topologies and the infrastructure as whole. Okay, so where we'll understand various technologies to understand from zero to expert level. Okay, so let's look into the syllabus, what we'll be going to cover. So we will be going to start with the Python. Now, why will be going to start with the Python? In automation, we will be having multiple languages and the tools to work with, but many has many pros like pros and cons. So we need to select the appropriate language, which should be easy for a non-tech guy or non-IT guy who's not having the background totally from the CS or computer science. He can easily pick up the language and which will be convenient and it will be efficient to work with. So Python is the best language, which is very close to the human language, and we can work with the Python, and it will be easy for us to get started with. We will be taking care for every candidate, whether you are from the tech background or non-tech background, we will be giving nice exposure for automation. So what will be going to cover in this? We'll be going to cover how to interact with system with Python. First, we'll understand what is a Python. Python is an interpreter language. So there is a different languages are in a market and they function very differently. Okay. So we'll understand how Python is an interpreter language and implementing code in line and line by line ways. Okay. So we'll understand Python with a basic scripts. Then we'll accept the values from users because we need to feed the information to the networking devices from the users. So we'll be passing information from the user and then we'll do a programming for that. And then we'll be understanding how to collect the values from the user. So when user will be feeding the values, as any languages are having numbers and alphabets in a language. So you need to understand in a language, we use symbols, characters, correct? Uppercase, lowercase. So each is having different meanings, right? So we need to understand the same with the programming language, which is a Python. So how Python deal with the characters, how it deal with the numbers and the symbols. So you need to understand the data types, and to hold any value, you need to have the container. In that container, you will be putting some values. So we called it a variable. So we'll be going to understand the variable with respect to the Python. How Python use the variables, how we name the variables, and how we operate over the variables. Then we need to understand the types of numbers what Python understands. Like in maths, we are having integers, which will be the complete number. Then we are having a float number, which is a fractional numbers, a complex numbers. We will be having a imaginary numbers attached to the fractional numbers. So we'll be having a complex number and the Boolean values like flags, whether the value will be either on or off, correct? So then we'll go and understand the strings. So alphabets are a group of characters will form a words and group of words will form a sentences. So we need to understand how Python deal with the strings. So we'll have the introduction to the strings and the methods of the strings to operate over those strings. Means when you accept the value and if you want to strip the value or slice it to collect the only specific information from the list, so you need to understand few methods for that. And then we'll understand operators and the formatting of a string. So how many ways you can put your string so we can make use of it to display some messages, that also will look. So these are our factors we'll be dealing with strings. Okay. So nextly we'll discuss next data type, which will be the list. So in list, we'll have the introduction to the list. We can understand list is a similar list what we are having on normal days. Let's say we want to go to the grocery shop and then you will be having an item list, correct? So list is a what? It is a collection of item which is in order which we want to purchase. If you have it, you will take it. You will not have it, you will mark it. You will go somewhere and look for the alternatives. Similar way, list in a Python is a collection of data types. A different data types or single data types we will be having here. Then we'll be having methods to operate over this data what we have collected. So this is the sequential data what we are having and we'll be operating over this data. Then we'll be working with this and we'll learn how to slice it, use the method, and we'll be having labs where we'll be having optimized solution or optimized script to code in efficient way in smaller lines. See, every code or every program can be solved in multiple ways. Let's take an example. Let's say 6. You can say 4 plus 2 is a 6, 10 minus 4 is a 6, 12 minus 6 is a 6. There are multiple ways you can put this. Similar way, a simple code can be written in a multiple ways. Okay, so we need to understand how we can write code optimize way, so it will be having less time complexity, less space complexity, and it will be fast and efficient to execute. Okay, now next I will discuss sets. Set is, we'll have the introduction to the set. In short, it's a collection of a serial data types. Again, you will be having a methods which will be operating over the sets. We'll discuss the frozen sets, and again we will be optimizing code for sets. Then we'll discuss next data type, which is a tuple. Tuple and list are kind similar, but tuple is immutable. So in detail, if we will be going to discuss, it is not going to change once it get declared. Okay, so we'll have the introduction for that. We will be going and understanding the methods for tuples, and we will be optimizing code for the tuple as well. Okay, now so next data type we'll discuss, that is a dictionary. Dictionary is a key value pair. Okay, dictionary is a key value pair data type where you will be having a key and the value for the particular key. Let's take an example. You are having a router. So if you consider this router, so this router is running some OS. So let's say you are having a OS. So let's say iOS we are having. This router is having some version. So you are having a version. Okay. So let's take in this way. Give me a second. Okay. Now, so let's say you are having a router, and router is having key value pair. So let's say a key value pair. Okay. Now this, if you want to put it, it will be go like this. Let's put it aside. Okay. This is the dictionary. Now we'll write it for, let's say we are having HSR router. The HSR router is having few details. Let's say OS what we are running here. Let's say iOS. Then we are having, let's say version. Version, let's say 15.2. Okay. Now similar way, if you pay attention here, okay, this is the name of dictionary. Here you are having key and the value pair. Similar way, you will be having key value pair in this data type, which will be helpful for us to understand. Okay. Now, so this is one way we will be going to understand. Now, next thing, we'll be going to discuss the conditional loops and the exception. So why we need to have the conditional loops? Because if you will be going to discuss multiple data types for multiple number of devices, you need to collect those information repeatedly. So if you want to repeat the process for multiple devices, you need to have a loop. Okay, so you need to have a loop. So for that, you need to understand the way you can have this loop with the mechanism. That is, we are going to understand for loop, while loop, for else, while else. And if you're going to check some logical conditions there, where you will going to need to check whether if it is present or not, whether it is good or not, this will be, you will be going to check here. Okay. Now, so similar way, you will be having this. So whenever you will be having some data which you will be sending from device, one device to another device, and it is going with a medium. Let's say you are using an API. API is having a standard data form, which is in a JSON format. So you need to understand the JSON for that. Okay. So we'll be going to understand dictionary, method of the dictionary, a JSON data type, where you will be using a dictionary collecting the data from live websites and Postmates and multiple other ways. Then we'll be having optimized lab for that. We will be using conditional, loop, and exception for handling the errors, checking the logical conditions, looping over them, looping inside a looping. So multiple ways you will be going to implement a loops. Then we'll be going to discuss a function. A function is a set of code which will be written once and reused later. So it's a user defined function where you define it for once. It can be used for multiple times. You just need to call the function. So we'll understand what is a function. We'll pass different ways argument to this. We'll use namespace there and we'll optimize for that. Okay. So we'll understand function in this way. So next we will be going to discuss how we'll be going to operate with files with the help of Python. So we will be going to work with a text file. Okay, we'll be going to work with text file, we'll be going to work with JSON file, we will be going to work with XML files. Okay, how to open the files, how to read the files, how to handle the errors while we are dealing with the files, reading, writing, appending the data into the file. We'll be having a function called with. We'll understand the different way you can operate the file. So you'll open in a normal way and with method, and we will be understanding the way you can access like read, write, execute. Okay, then we'll understand the importance of regular expression. If you want to shorthand your code, you need to understand the regular expression, which will be going to use the multiple line code in a shorter way and express your logic in very shorter manner. So we'll understand match, search, find all, and sub. These are methods with regular expression, and we'll understand with a lab where we'll understand what codes getting generated while you're dealing with the regular expressions. Then next we will discuss a classes. Okay, classes and object oriented programming with a Python. What will be the key factor you need to understand while you are working with the network automation scripting? So classes will have the introduction to the classes, how to inherit the capacity or the features what we have declared in a class. So we will understand the inheritance way. Then we'll have the introduction to the object and how you will be accessing those features from the classes here, and we'll have the lab to understand and practically demonstrate the features how we inherit it and implement in a Python automation. Okay, now so nextly we'll discuss the operations what we will be going to perform on files. So input output operations on a file. As we discussed earlier, we will be collecting a data from a different varieties of file like text file, CSV file, JSON, YAML files. We will verify the connectivity with networking devices and Linux environment, which may be virtual, physical, with a file. If you are working with a large scale, the data might be present in a JSON file, might be present in a YAML file, CSV file, or text file. You will be operating between a variety of different file formats. So you will be going to connect to the multiple devices via these files, and you need to understand what all errors you can encounter while you are dealing with these files. Then we will be understand the open method. Then we also need to understand data serialization and the data deserialization. So there is a different terms where what we will be going to understand. If we will be referring to the OSI model, we have few terminologies in a networking. We have encoding, decoding, encryption, decryption, encoding, decoding, serialization, and deserialization. There is a significant difference between each these terms what we just discussed. So we'll be going to understand in detail what is the serialization, deserialization, encoding, decoding, and encryption and decryption as well. Okay. So next we will discuss a JSON file. So as we discussed earlier, you have to use a certain format. So JSON will be a nice way to deal with the APIs. So via API, if we'll be passing some details, so RESTful APIs will be having a JSON where we will be passing methods and accepting the methods via JSON file, collecting the data, operating over the data, how we'll be operating with RESTful APIs by HTTP methods. So we'll be going to understand get method, put method, delete method. So these all methods we will understand, and we will work with a variety of APIs. We'll also go with the Postman APIs, and we will live we will have the live lab where we will be working on these APIs. Now, next we will discuss a brief about how automation actually happen. So we'll be having some credential. We are having a script where you will be having a network ID where you will be passing some credential. You will be verifying that credentials are correct or not. Depending upon your credentials, it will take the action whether you should provide the access or you should provide a different request to get it verified. So in normal terms, if you understand, if you are having a SSH connection, you provide username and the password, then you accept a fingerprint key, which is a SSH key, and then your session is getting authenticated, and then you have access. Correct. So we will understand whole process of automation with flowcharts, and in detail way we'll be going to discuss. So what all terms we will be going to discuss in automation flow? We will understand the logical flow of the automation. We will checking the validity and connection. I will be having with a file, and directly we'll be verifying with different varieties of ways we'll be going to connect to the networking devices. So we'll have SSH connectivity, HTTP connectivity. We'll also passing the data via APIs. So all these things we will be going to taking under consideration, and stepwise we will understand the flow and will connect to the devices. Next, we will understand what all APIs and what all libraries we'll be going to use with Python. So let's start with the libraries first. So we'll be going to use Paramiko, which is a Python library which allow us to communicate and configure the devices. So it will be the best way we can communicate with Paramiko. So we'll go and understand how we can communicate with the networking devices with Paramiko, and we'll optimize the script, and we'll also understand how to deal with the errors if we encountered while we are doing the automation. Next, we will discuss a NetMiko library. This is another Python library which allow us to communicate to the networking devices with better way than the Paramiko. This is the advanced version of your Paramiko, which is having a less complexity than Paramiko. So again, we will be having introduction to Paramiko. We'll also understand how we can communicate to the networking devices with the Paramiko, and we'll optimize the script with Paramiko, and we'll deal with the error handling mechanism with NetMiko. Then to collect the data from the devices and to operate over the data, we'll be going to discuss next thing, that is a NAPLM. So NAPLM is another library which is open source for support for multiple network devices, where we will be collecting data and operating over those data. So we'll be having introduction to the NAPLM, and we'll understand the connectivity with NAPLM, and then we'll optimize those scripts and we'll deal with the error handling mechanism. So here we have conclude what we'll be going to learn with Python automation, with Python libraries. Now we'll see how we can automate a Linux environment. So to operate with Linux operating systems, we need to understand the Linux infrastructure. So we'll have a little bit introduction to the Linux environment. Then we'll understand how we can automate the Linux environment. Then we'll try to connect to the Linux environment via Python, and we'll optimize those scripts, and we'll deal with the errors what we will be encountered while we are connecting to the network environment. Okay. Now, nextly we'll discuss symmetric and asymmetric encryption. So public-private key authentication will be going to discuss here, where we will be understanding the cryptography, what types of cryptographies we are having, like symmetric and asymmetric. Inside that, we'll understand public-private key mechanism, we'll try to connect to the different devices like network devices and the Linux environment with public private key authentication, and we'll optimize those script and we'll handle those errors. Then lastly, we will learn how to automate networking devices and the Linux environment with Ansible. So we'll understand what is Ansible, component of Ansible, modules and playbooks, what we'll be going to use in Ansible, and then automate Linux environment and networking devices with Ansible. So these all what topics we will be going to learn in depth from scratch to advanced to automate your networking environments. So here we have concluded the syllabus, what we'll be going to cover in your network automation. So do anybody have any queries? If you have any queries, you can contact us to networkers.com. You can visit our website. You can put your queries in a chat box. So here we'll be concluding our session for introduction to your DevNet and network automation. Thank you so much for your time.